This Sunday, the end of Roe v. Wade.
Complete and utter joy that it was finally overturned.
It feels like a betrayal.
The Supreme Court overturns the right to abortion nearly 50 years after Roe.
Let's be very clear. The health and life of women in this nation are now at risk.
States already moving to stop abortions, with more to come.
Restoring the state of Arkansas the authority to prohibit abortions.
This morning, the legal, medical, and political fallout from this historic decision. I'll talk to Republican Governor Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas and to Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York. Plus, the January 6th committee.
President Trump ultimately wanted the Department of Justice to say the election was, quote, corrupt and, quote, leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman.
Former President Trump schemed to stay in power, pushing for an ally to run justice and claim election fraud, relying on internet rumors and baseless claims.
My recollection, he said, we've got lots of theories, we just don't have the evidence.
My guest this morning, committee member Adam Schiff. And
The motion is adopted.
President Biden signs the first gun safety legislation in decades, even as the Supreme Court expands gun rights. Joining me for insight and analysis are NBC News Chief Washington Correspondent Andrea Mitchell, Kimberly Atkins-Storr, Senior Opinion Writer for the Boston Globe, NBC News Senior Capitol Hill Correspondent Garrett Haake, and Wall Street Journal columnist Peggy Noonan. Welcome to Sunday. It's Meet the Press.
From NBC News in Washington, the longest-running show in television history. This is Meet the Press with Chuck Todd.
Good Sunday morning. After a week that was among the most significant in our recent history, even before the Roe decision, the January 6th committee heard evidence of an attempted coup led by a defeated president who sought any way possible to hold on to power. And we saw the Supreme Court significantly expand gun rights, even as President Biden signed the first gun safety bill into law in decades. But it was the court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade and nearly 5 decades of abortion rights that gripped the nation and prompted celebrations and bitterness from coast to coast. What we know is abortion is likely to be banned in roughly half the states. And Justice Clarence Thomas suggested birth control, gay rights, and same-sex marriage could be next. And we now know that Donald Trump's 2016 election, which gave him 3 Supreme Court picks, all of whom voted to overturn Roe, is easily now among the most consequential ever in our nation's history. What we don't know is the political fallout from all this. Will there be room in the Republican Party for people who actually want some abortion rights? Can Democrats channel their anger and frustration to win elections and pull even with Republicans for this November? And thanks to how this court was put together, its credibility has never been more in question. And this decision came at a time when the country is already dangerously divided.
It's a sad day for the court and for the country.
Today's historic Supreme Court decision is a victory for the sanctity of life.
Nearly 50 years after Roe,
In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions.
the decision by the High Court to eliminate the constitutional right to an abortion was met with celebrations and anger, with protests in cities across the country.
It's shocking. This is something that women should have a right to.
It's a roller coaster of emotion. It's complete and utter joy.
The justices decided 6-3 to uphold Mississippi's law banning abortion after 15 weeks, the case actually before the court. But then they went further, deciding 5-4 to overturn Roe. All 3 of Trump's appointees were in the majority. Chief Justice John Roberts said he would have taken a more measured course.
We couldn't be happier with this decision, and I've never been prouder to be a Mississippian.
We are headed down a dangerous spiral that will erode our democracy.
The decision set in motion trigger bans in 13 states. In 7 of those states, abortion is now already illegal. At least 24 states are certain or likely to ban abortion soon.
Swift action to certify Section 861 banned abortion in our state immediately.
We're fighting like hell here in Michigan to protect Michigan women's access to abortion and reproductive health care.
Now there are questions about health implications, from access to care, to fertility services, to emergency contraception, about the criminalization of abortion care, and about what's to come for other privacy rights.
The Supreme Court is a different branch of government. They can look at whatever comes before them.
Justice Clarence Thomas wrote in a concurrence, "In future cases, we should reconsider all of this court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell, decisions on contraception, sex, and same-sex marriage." Alito's majority opinion differed, saying abortion is fundamentally different from those precedents. Now, without the votes in the Senate to codify Roe into law, Democrats are turning to November.
Roe is on the ballot.
Reproductive freedom is on the ballot.
The answer is simple. It's November. It's the ballot box.
Hoping the abortion issue will divide Republicans, drive base turnout, and turn swing voters, suburban women in particular, from a focus on the economy to the fight over reproductive rights.
One of the states with a trigger law was Arkansas. And hours after the Supreme Court released its opinion, the state officially banned all abortions except to save the life of the mother. There is no exception for rape or incest. So joining me now is the Republican governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson. Governor Hutchinson, welcome back to Meet the Press, sir.
It's great to be with you, Chuck. Thank you.
Let me start with what the Arkansas law does. No exception for rape or incest. Do you believe that's a mistake?
Well, first of all, this is a day that those in the pro-life movement has worked for over 40 years. I didn't think it would come this quickly, and the decision of the Supreme Court was really something that will save lives. In Arkansas, we immediately followed the direction of the law. It triggered the ban on abortion, except, as you said, in the case of the life of the mother. What that means is that we're going to work hard to make sure that mothers have the services that they need. We're going to expand adoption services to meet those needs. That's what's critically important right now. And we have to remember, this is not a nationwide ban on abortion. Every state is going to have the ability under the court decision to make its own decisions. Arkansas made its choice previous to that based upon the trigger law, and other states are going to make different decisions. This is fundamental, as the court said, in our democracy, that ultimately the people decide through their elected representatives.
So if a 13-year-old, though, in Arkansas is raped by a relative, that 13-year-old cannot get an abortion in Arkansas. Are you comfortable with that?
I'm not. I would have preferred a different outcome than that. But that's not the debate today in Arkansas. It might be in the future, but for now, the law triggered with only one exception. While you can debate whether there ought to be additional exceptions, every state's going to make a different determination on that under our Constitution. And this is going to continue to be discussed. But at this particular point, the only exception in Arkansas is to save the life of the mother.
There's a few other questions I think that people in Arkansas have about sort of now what. Emergency contraception, the so-called Plan B pill. Is it legal for someone in Arkansas to take or not now?
Well, first of all, the fact that Justice Thomas said that, some of these other cases ought to be looked at, there was no one that joined in that opinion. So this is not about contraceptions. This is not about same-sex marriage, a very limited decision on this particular issue of abortion. And so in Arkansas, the right to contraception is important. It's recognized. It's not going to be touched. And that's the outcome here. And again, every state can debate that, but I don't see that's a threat. And it's very important now to assure women that the access to contraception is going to be able to continue.
Does the morning after pill qualify as contraception?
Well, every state, again, will make that determination.
So it's not clear?
Those regulations that they will determine will be reviewed by the court. Okay. In Arkansas, that should not be an issue.
What about IUDs? There are some, it's a fertilized egg, which under Arkansas's law might be considered an unborn child. Are IUDs part of this ban?
No, it's a contraception, and that is continued to be permitted. It's not an issue in this. This is about abortion, and that's what has been triggered, and it's not about contraception. That is clear, and women should be assured of that.
And what is, What about for miscarriages? Is there's going to be the treatment for miscarriages looks very similar to the treatment of abortion. Is there going to be a department in Arkansas that inspects all miscarriages or investigates miscarriages?
No, absolutely not. We're obviously have oversight of abortion clinics to make sure that they follow the law. But again, Chuck, this is about a limited ruling on abortion that is historic in nature, will save lives. But the other decisions, when you're talking about miscarriages, the exception is, of course, if the life of the mother or there's a medical health emergency, and that's between the physician. They're going to make those judgments and how to handle those things. This is simply about abortion.
This is between a doctor and the woman then, when it comes to those decisions. I say that so the doctor can feel as if there's no criminal liability they're under when they treat women and decide that an abortion is necessary due to save her life. That doctor's not going to get investigated. That doctor's not going to get harassed.
They certainly should not. But it's very important that doctors have always made life and health and death decisions. That's what they're trained to do. They have to make those medical judgments, and it's not the state's judgment to reconfigure those or to rethink those. They make those judgments, and the decision that has to be made is whether there's an abortion, and then you go after the provider as a criminal penalty, not the woman. That's a very important thing. What I've told my Department of Health is this. One, enforce the law, but secondly, I want a plan in which we can provide greater resources to women who are going through unwanted pregnancies, to make sure that we have the pregnancy centers. We put $1 million more into funding of those to provide resources for the women. That's what I'm telling my Department of Health.
Whatever you thought of Roe, that decision never forced anybody to do anything they didn't want to do. This decision now will force a woman to carry a pregnancy that they perhaps didn't want to do. Does that at all make you uncomfortable? That you're forcing somebody to do something they don't want to do. Roe didn't do that. This ruling does.
Well, no, I think it's a very appropriate ruling. Obviously, when you're looking at the government and the power of the government forcing someone to carry a child to term, you've got to think that through, and legislators are thinking that through. And whenever you're looking at the opportunity to save the unborn child, that is the rare circumstance in this case that you use the power of the state to say, unless the health of the mother is at risk, let's carry that child to term. And so when you're saving life, that's an appropriate role of the state, and that's what the courts have said the states can determine. Other states might make a different judgment. That's why we have elections. That's why we have elected representatives to make these best judgments pertaining to life, and that's what Arkansas did under these circumstances. It'll continue to be debated, but for right now, that's the judgment that we've made.
You're thinking about running for president. Former Vice President Mike Pence is pushing for a nationwide ban on abortion. If you run for president, if you got elected president, would you advocate and sign into law a nationwide ban on abortion?
The answer is I don't believe that we ought to go back to saying there ought to be a national law that's passed. We've fought for 50 years to have this returned to the states. We've won that battle. It's back to the states. Let's let it be resolved there. I think there's also a constitutional issue as to whether the federal government has that authority to begin with under the Commerce Clause. But I also would add that it's important that in the Republican Party, we're a broad-based party, and we're going to have people disagree on this issue, and this is healthy for the debate. We're going to not start excluding people because they might have a different nuanced view on this. That's what a robust party does. That's what the debate will be in the future. By and large, it's different than the Democrat Party that says abortion without any limits. We say there ought to be limits. We ought to work to protect life, but there's a lot of debate within that, and that will continue.
Governor Asa Hutchinson, Republican from Arkansas, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective on this issue, sir.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Joining me now, Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York. Congresswoman, welcome back to Meet the Press. Look, before I get to my first question, I want to get your reaction to the governor of Arkansas, especially specifically to this issue of that he is comfortable with the government essentially forcing a woman to carry out a pregnancy.
Well, I think naturally I couldn't disagree more with Governor Hutchinson, but I think what's really important is honing in on this idea that the governor and the Republican Party and, frankly, the Republican legislature in Arkansas cares about the life of a woman and the life of a mother. The state of Arkansas and Governor Hutchinson governs over a state that has the third highest maternal mortality in the United States. 71% of the women who die are Black women as well. This is a state that has 26% child poverty, where 1 in 4 children are living in in poverty in the state of Arkansas, and forcing women to carry pregnancies against their will kill them. It will kill them, especially in the state of Arkansas, where there is very little to no support for life after birth in terms of health care, in terms of child care, and in terms of combating poverty. This decision and this policy will kill people, no matter what their spin and what their talking points are. And that's what the data shows, and that's what the statistics show.
Congresswoman, I know most of what may change things is going to have to be done at a ballot box. But what would you like to see the Biden administration do between now and November?
I think what we need to do is show the American people that when they give the Democratic Party power and when they actually do vote for us, that we will be using and we are willing to use the power that they do give us in order to merit increased expansions in our majority. So in terms of what I think the president's administration should be able to do, we have many ideas. We have some ideas coming from Senator Warren, signed a letter along with 25 other Democratic senators asking President Biden to explore opening healthcare clinics on federal lands in red states in order to help people access the health care and abortion services that they need. We also must, and President Biden did indicate that he was going to start looking into expanding abortion access via the pill, as well as educational efforts henceforth. But also what I believe that the president and the Democratic Party needs to come to terms with is that this is not just a crisis of Roe. This is a crisis of our democracy. The Supreme Court has dramatically overreached its authority. We had 2 conservative senators in the United States Senate, Senator Manchin and Senator Collins, come out with a very explosive allegation that several Supreme Court justices misled them during their confirmation hearings and in the lead up to their confirmation. This is a crisis of legitimacy. We have a Supreme Court justice whose wife participated in January 6th and who used his seat to vote against providing documents that potentially led to evidence of such to investigators in Congress. This is a crisis of legitimacy, and President Biden must address that.
It's interesting you say that. I want to put up the Joe Manchin quote in particular on his reaction, because he used the word, he said, they testified under oath. He made sure that was in his release. It sounds like you believe, okay, that he might as well be saying they lied to him, that he feels like they lied to him and they lied under oath. You think the House Judiciary Committee should begin the process of an investigation there?
If we allow Supreme Court nominees to lie under oath and secure lifetime appointments to the highest court of the land and then issue without basis, if you read these opinions, issue without basis rulings that deeply undermine the human and civil rights of the majority of Americans, we must see that through. There must be consequences for such a deeply destabilizing action and hostile takeover of our democratic institutions. To allow that to stand is to allow it to happen. And what makes it particularly dangerous is that it sends a blaring signal to all future nominees that they can now lie to duly elected members of the United States Senate in order to secure Supreme Court confirmations and seats on the Supreme Court. This is what we're saying.
Do you think lying at a confirmation hearing is an impeachable offense?
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so. I believe lying under oath is an impeachable offense. I believe that violating federal law in not disclosing income from political organizations, as Clarence Thomas did years ago, is also potentially an impeachable offense. I believe that that not recusing from cases that one clearly has family members involved in with very deep violations of conflict of interest are also impeachable offenses. And I believe that this is something that should be very seriously considered, including by senators like Joe Manchin and Susan Collins.
I want to ask you a slightly bigger picture question here. Jason Linkins wrote this in the New Republic, and it seemed to ring true with a lot of folks. Under the headline, "The Democrats' Theory of Change, Wait for the Republicans to Screw Up." For the GOP, change comes after long periods of hard work, steady funding, and maintaining enthusiasm and momentum through periods of setback. For Democrats, change is reactive, coming only after the GOP's ambitions have hurt just enough people to make Republican rule untenable. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that it does speak to a generational change within the Democratic Party. You know, I believe that there are, there is an establishment within the Democratic Party that has a nostalgia for a better time of politics from decades ago. You hear this very often when you hear certain Democrats say that they wished for a strong Republican Party. But the fact of the matter is that we have a new and very different Republican Party that more people are recognizing, but frankly, the roots of which have already been there, which is a lack of respect for American institutions, a lack of respect for the law, and a deep desire to debase very, very critical underpinnings of our democracy. And so I do believe that there has been a weak Democratic strategy in the past, and we cannot continue to use those same playbooks. Right now, as I say, is that this is overtime for our democracy, and we must be aggressive.
Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York, appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective with us. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you very much.
When we come back, the legal, medical, and political fallout from this monumental Supreme Court decision. Panelists next. Welcome back. Panelists here. NBC News Chief Washington Correspondent Andrea Mitchell, NBC News Senior Capitol Hill Correspondent Garrett Haake, Wall Street Journal columnist Peggy Noonan, and Kimberly Atkins-Storr, Senior Opinion Writer for the Boston Globe. I want to start with Susan Collins and what she put out. Throwing out a precedent overnight that the country has relied upon for a half a century is not conservative. It is sudden and a radical jolt to the country that will lead to political chaos, anger, and a further loss of confidence in our government. John Roberts used judicial restraint, Peggy. I'm curious of what happened to small c conservatism and judicial restraint here.
Well, another way, I understand what Susan Collins said, but another way to view this is a long 50-year struggle that observed all processes and appealed to the public and tried to get support and played the long game and did its very best, has suddenly, it seems, but after 50 years, succeeded in the court. And the end result of that is that a big, huge, dramatic question will not be settled by the court, as it were, as it had been 49 years ago, but will actually go back to the people of the country who, state by state, will decide through their legislators and representatives what their local abortion law will be. I do not see this big decision as a settlement of this question, but I do think it has put forward a legitimate and, to me, desirable democratic settlement, and it'll be turbulent for the next few years. It just will.
Kimberly, what was interesting, she talked about the long 50-year campaign on the right to get this done. One thing the campaign never succeeded at doing was changing public opinion.
No. Public opinion has changed here, and that's what is remarkable at how the conservative bent, the fast change of this Supreme Court that was done by design, by pure construction, has gone so far against public opinion. I personally don't believe that people's civil rights and constitutional rights should be up to public approval, but the fact that it is going so far against it speaks to that. And my quibble with what Peggy has said here is that interesting that the court picks and chooses when they take this democratic route. They didn't do so with the Second Amendment. They opposed their will on even states that wanted to put better protections there. But on this issue, they're deciding to, and this goes so far beyond abortion. And abortion is important, and reproductive health care is important because it touches that. But this is getting to the very heart of the 14th Amendment of what protects all the vulnerable people in this country. And what they are saying is, unless you have a long history of having this country respect and protect those rights, then you may be out of luck when we have the cases in the future. And as a black woman in America, that's terrifying.
You know, Andrea, I've actually talked to some legal experts building off what Kimberly said that said eventually, if this gets back to the Supreme Court, it may be under an equal protection standard because of look at what we're going to see around the country. Women are not going to have the same equal rights depending on the state they live in.
Well, this is contributing to the balkanization of our country. Our country is now going to be so divided, just legally divided. Half the states are not going to permit abortion. And that is going to prohibit abortion from those who cannot travel. And immediately, there are people in Arkansas and Mississippi who are going to have to go 1,000 miles. That is absolutely to Illinois. I was talking to several people in those states yesterday as we were anchoring on this very subject. And they can't travel 1,000 miles. They don't have the money. They don't have the money for daycare. They don't have the ability to get there for all of the pre-testing that you're supposed to have and for the follow-up exams. And what is so remarkable is that when Roe was decided, and I'm, old enough, to have lived as an adult pre-Roe, and I know what the situation was. And actually, public opinion has not really changed over these 49 and a half years. What's happened is that the court has changed. You now have a supermajority where the Chief Justice does not even have sway and has not for the last year and a half or so because of this supermajority, who is basically ignoring public opinion. And they're not supposed to be political because they're going their own way. A supermajority that can do things, whatever they choose to do. Roe was decided 7-2 in an opinion by Justice Blackmun, a Republican, supported by Chief Justice Berger, a Republican, during the years of Richard Nixon. And it was decided, on a basis of what they interpreted. Now, it has been questioned because they chose privacy, not equal protection. But what you're now going to see is more of this red-blue state division and on a powerfully emotional issue.
Garrett, bring me to Congress. When Roe was decided in 73, the two parties were equally divided on abortion. There were a lot of pro-life Democrats. And look, a lot of people have noted one time Donald Trump was pro-choice, one time Joe Biden was pro-life, right? We've been through this. George H.W. Bush, the Bush family, donors to Planned Parenthood back in the day. Is there going to, if this new Republican majority comes in the House, is there going to be an abortion ban?
Kevin McCarthy certainly left that option on the table, suggesting that he would put forward or would support a 15-week abortion ban if one came up in the House, as I suspect one probably will, especially if the majority is big enough in the House. Ironically, this has been Kyrsten Sinema's position on not getting rid of the filibuster, that this vote will come up, and that the filibuster may be the only protection that Democrats have left, either in 2 years from now or potentially in 4 years from now under a Republican president, to prevent a national abortion standard. Now, conservatives have made the argument that they want this to be decided at the state level. But I think Democrats, as you just heard from Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, read the writing on the wall here. You can say one thing, whether it's in a confirmation hearing or what have you, but Republican, everything they have done suggests they want to see this ban at a national level. And, to your point about the parties being balkanized on this, you're not winning a Republican primary for a state house seat in Missouri or Texas or a state like that unless you believe in, abortion ban with no exceptions. That's the direction that party's going, and Democrats have to be prepared for it.
Peggy, politically, during the era of Roe, it was the Democrats that would be infighting over where do you draw the line, late-term abortions. Republicans did a great job of wedging. And now all of a sudden, it's the Republicans that are going to have to, because some are going to want exceptions. Governor Hutchinson talked about it, but Garrett brought up a point. Is that going to survive primaries?
Well, this is going to work its way out. I would say everybody here, I think, agrees that when polled, the American people say they're for Roe. They're for the right of abortion as seen in the Constitution. But the minute you get beyond that, to questions of the cutoff, is it 12 weeks or 14? Then support goes down. It all becomes more complicated. The fact was, I think, legally, Roe and Casey just were sort of incompatible with getting all of those reservations worked out in the law. So I think that is part of what drove it. Look, you know what the Republican Party should do now? It should use this victory, if you see it that way, to change itself and become a party that helps women, change its reputation, become a party that helps women and children, becomes responsible and supportive.
We are here because Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell got together and made a litmus test for overturning Roe for Supreme Court nominees. Sandra Day O'Connor did not have that litmus test. David Souter didn't have it. Anthony Kennedy didn't have it. That is why we are here, is because Republicans from the top set the tone.
And Merrick Garland did not even get a hearing.
100%.
Here's the good news. I'm going to give you guys more time. It's just not right now. It'll be later in the show. When we come back, the story that in any other week would have led our show and dominated the news, the riveting testimony about former President Trump's schemes to stay in power. Congressman Adam Schiff joins me next. Welcome back. Almost lost in all the news about Roe v. Wade was the consequential week in the January 6 hearings. We had two of them. On Tuesday, the congressional panel tied former President Trump to a plot to have states create fake elector slates. And they showed how he pressured state officials to overturn his election loss in any way they could find. Then on Thursday, we heard how Mr. Trump sought to install an ally at the head of the Justice Department, Jeffrey Clark, to falsely claim the election was fraudulent and coerce states to flip their results.
I said, Mr. President, within 24, 48, 72 hours, you could have hundreds and hundreds of resignations of the leadership of your entire Justice Department because of your actions. What's that going to say about you?
The actions of Rosen and Donahue there basically kept us within 2 hours of a constitutional crisis. Joining me now is Congressman Adam Schiff, who led Tuesday's hearings. Mr. Schiff, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good to be with you.
Let me start with what's coming first. We were going to have two more hearings this coming week. You've delayed 2 weeks. I know. Can you give us a little bit more on what more has come in and on what specific areas has more information come in that you feel as if you need more time?
Well, the next couple of hearings will cover the run-up to January 6th, the marshaling of this mob that appeared on the mall that day and attacked the Capitol. And then the final hearing will cover what the president was doing and, more importantly, what he was not doing as we were being attacked.
In those hours on January 6th itself.
Exactly. Yeah. Basically, the president's flagrant dereliction of duty while the Capitol was being attacked. This will give us a little more time to get prepared for those two hearings. A lot of work, as you might imagine, goes into each and every one of these hearings, and we keep learning new information all the time that we want to incorporate. So this will give us a little more breathing space to do that.
You've spent a couple hours with the documentary filmmaker. You've now gotten all of his video information. Does it add any facts that you did not know?
It's hard for me to characterize because we have information from other sources that the public hasn't seen yet. But it certainly adds to the footage of that day, some new perspectives that we haven't had, at least captured on film. I don't want to get too far ahead. Part of what's made these hearings successful is their combination of what's already known and things that the public hasn't known yet. And most important, we do try to tie it all together and show the public where it all fits its pieces.
Look, one of the, if there's a search for a smoking gun here, it is to find evidence that Donald Trump knew he lost, but went about this anyway. Have you found specific evidence to know that he knew he lost and that this belief defense is one that is just not going to work?
I think we continue to see powerful evidence of that. And just this week, and every now and then you see something that tells you in microcosm what it's all about. In the last hearing, the president saying to top Justice Department officials, just say it was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republicans. That's an acknowledgement by the president after making all these fruitless claims of fraud and being told that's not true, that's not true, that's not true. The president didn't care. What he wanted them to do was just say it was corrupt. And Jeffrey Clark, this unqualified environmental lawyer that he was going to put at the top of the Justice Department, drafted a letter to Georgia falsely claiming that the Justice Department believed there was sufficient fraud to overturn the election and Georgia should call its legislature back into session. The president understood that all of the Justice Department leadership thought that was completely bogus, and he was prepared to go along with it, except for the threat of mass resignation.
So that, by the way, that meeting January 3rd, that 2 hours from the constitutional crisis, is it when that fails, should we then see the pressure campaign on Pence that basically begins 48 hours before January 6th? It intensifies. Does that no-go intensify this? Is that the connective tissue there the conclusion we should draw?
I think you see the pressure continue to build and build and build. These lines of effort that were failing were never completely walked away from. The pressure on the state legislators continued right up until the 6th. The effort to get these fake electors counted by the vice president, the pressure campaign against the vice president, all of that continued. But on the 6th, the last-ditch effort was to get that crowd to stop what was happening in the building. And we see then that January 6th was not a day in isolation. It was the culmination of several efforts, the violent culmination of an effort to overturn the election.
A couple things. This week, boy, the Department of Justice has certainly let the public know it was doing a lot more on January 6th than we'd seen in the past. I think there were subpoenas served on at least 9 people in 4 states. A search warrant was executed on the home of Jeffrey Clark. You've been critical in the past of the Justice Department. You felt as if there was maybe they were being a little passive. Do you still have that criticism, or do you look at their actions this week and does that reassure you a little bit?
It certainly seems that there's a greater sense of urgency than I've seen before. At the same time, I have yet to see any indication that the former president himself is under investigation. And I concur with what Judge Carter out in California said, that there's sufficient evidence to believe the former president violated multiple federal laws. And you can't hold anyone immune. You can't say there's a different standard, a different rule of law for former presidents, particularly when you took the position while they were in office that they couldn't be indicted.
This country's, I've characterized it as dangerously divided right now. An indictment of a former president, that could throw gasoline on this fire. Choosing not to hold him accountable could also throw gasoline on this fire. There are no good outcomes here. What's a worse outcome on that front? And do you understand why the Attorney General may be really struggling with this decision?
Well, I think it's a very difficult decision, but I don't think it's a difficult, that is to prosecute. It's not a difficult decision to investigate when there's evidence before you. And I think the worst case scenario is not that Donald Trump runs and wins, but that he runs and loses and they overturn the election because there's no deterrent, because there's no effort to push back
what if you
and hold
prosecute
people
him and he
accountable.
gets off?
Well, that's always a risk. But the fact is, if you follow the evidence where it leads, if you believe that you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt, then you have a duty to prosecute. And the decision not to investigate or not to prosecute becomes a political decision that, well, this person is immune from the rule of law.
Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat from California. So we got a 2-week break and then a couple more hearings. Thanks for coming on and sharing your perspective. When we come back, the other big story of the week, the Supreme Court's expansion of gun rights. The ruling was on a New York state law that was over 100 years old. But what happened in New York is not staying there. Back in a moment. Welcome Welcome back. Data download time. The abortion decision was not the only news from the Supreme Court this week. On Thursday, the High Court struck down a New York law that strictly limited who can carry a gun in public. It was over 100 years old. The 6-3 ruling immediately, though, raised questions about similar laws in other states. But long term, it could have even broader impacts on all sorts of other gun rules nationwide. Let me show you. First of all, the law that was impacted was New York State, but it could impact laws on the books that are very similar to New York's when it comes to who can carry a gun in California, New York, Maryland, New Jersey. Bottom line is there may be only a handful of states, but a lot of people reside in these handful of states, 25% of the population impacted by that ruling directly. Now, what was interesting is what was said in the ruling. The justification of this ruling was this: to justify a firearm regulation, the government must demonstrate that the regulation is consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. It's a pretty broad new standard that the Supreme Court wants to apply to all sorts of gun laws. So what could that mean? Well, how about high-capacity magazine bans? About 10 states plus the District of Columbia has those. Are those in the tradition of gun regulation that goes back more than 100 years? It's unlikely the court would find that. Those could be targeted by gun rights organizations to try to get those bans ruled unconstitutional. Then there's red flag laws. In fact, the U.S. Senate, the Congress, and President Biden just signed into law a new bill that would actually encourage more states to have red flag laws. But that doesn't mean that gun rights organizations think they are constitutional. And they may go back to the court to see if that standard can be used to rule these 19 states and some others unconstitutional. Bottom line, a lot of gun laws on a lot of jurisdictions could now be vulnerable with this new standard that the Supreme Court has come up with. When we come back, why former President Trump thinks the abortion decision may be bad politics for Republicans. We are back. One person whose legacy is going to get defined by the overturn of Roe v. Wade is Donald Trump and Andrea Mitchell. Donald Trump doesn't seem to be very excited about this. He called it a victory for life at his rally in Illinois yesterday, but he is mumbling and grumbling all over the place about this, and he believes this is going to hurt Republicans in the midterm.
No, absolutely. Look, when he ran, is a fake evangelical, and he's a fake supporter of banning abortion, and all of this was antithetical to him, and it was politically, important in Iowa and other places as he was running. So this is not his core beliefs because he is not ideological. He's just pragmatic. And he can see that the handwriting on this is that while the economy is the biggest issue and will continue to be the biggest issue, and inflation driving the midterm elections, it is going to be abortion rising as a big issue. And it's especially going to be important in trigger states, in states with a total ban, in Michigan, Wisconsin, where governors could change hands, the people who could veto Republican legislatures. One thing that has been overlooked is how in 2010 this really emerged, and Republicans, activists, not Republicans generically, but activists who really wanted to ban abortion, seized on this with the Tea Party movement in 2010, and it was a census year, so they grabbed state legislatures. About 10 state legislatures changed hands from Democratic to Republican. And it is at the state level, as Asa Hutchinson says, but at the state level, this became baked in with redistricting, and more states now have Republican legislatures who will ban or restrict abortions if governors or state officials are not there to veto it.
This has always been a challenge for Democrats to keep their voters focused on state legislatures, state houses, governors' races, AGs' races. Having Barack Obama for 8 years is one thing, but if all of these state legislatures are flipping, you're in a world of hurt. And I don't see this issue playing as much on the federal level, maybe at the margins in some of these Senate and House races. But again, if you're running for governor, if you look at the governor's race in Pennsylvania, could be ground zero. Some of these state house races in places like Michigan that could go either way. I'm curious if it has an effect in Texas at all. This doesn't play. A total abortion ban doesn't really play in Plano or the Woodlands, but is that enough to help a Democrat running for governor in Texas?
But the problem for Democrats here is, as we've seen with Republicans, this is not something you can flip overnight.
No.
This is a decade, a generation-long movement on the right that has led us here. And the Democrats, it's not clear to see if they've even started what will have to be a generation-long movement to move this backwards, not just with the Supreme Court, but at the state level. As you are saying, I think it's going to take horrific details about how women are dying because of complications in a pregnancy and other terrible outcomes for this before the public really understands how important this is.
I actually wonder if there's a blueprint in what we just saw with the guns legislation, where it was a decade in that case, but it took Sandy Hook and the absolute horror of that for Democrats to get electorally organized around the issue of guns. They spent a decade doing it. They were able to get a big breakthrough this week. Whether this ruling is enough to start a process.
They've got a presidential election and a midterm, and they're going to lose control potentially and won't be able to do anything. There's no way that they can do anything in the Senate unless they do get rid of the filibuster rule.
Not happening.
Can I note, I think something that is important for liberals now, realize this. A big decision came down. For 50 years, the courts had put it one way. Liberals will now have to get in the game in a whole new way democratically, and that is through persuasion, not anger, rage, all that stuff.
But persuasion. The right didn't need persuasion.
The right, I think, talked about this.
But they never got it. They never, but the persuasion, I don't mean, persuasion argument never worked.
No. People said consistently, yes, Roe, abortion rights. But the minute you got past the 4th, 5th, and 6th week, that's where the persuasion was.
Do you think that
that's
they
where
were,
they
but
did,
they were
I
winning.
think, change minds.
I guess, Peggy, what I just don't understand and what it feels like why a boomerang is coming, it's the life side was winning incrementally. And now it's like they've rushed to catch the car, and now, we don't like when anything is rushed and overdone.
Well, I don't think it was rushed, but it sure feels sudden.
Yeah.
I think. Do you know
Abrupt.
what I mean? Yes, abrupt. I think I experienced that so much on the day of Dobbs, when so many emails and texts came in from people, normal humans, who said, "I had no idea this was happening." They were just shocked. So there was an abruptness. But I think persuasion was part of this whole thing. You had to persuade a lot of people to make a movement triumph. It wasn't just raw muscle.
You can't have persuasion. No, I'm sorry. That is bad on me. You can't have persuasion when you have a young Supreme Court. They're going to be here for decades. This is a supermajority that is not going anywhere anytime soon. And it was done because of, as I say, Merrick Garland not getting a hearing, and then 3 Trump justices who misled the Senate. Right. And so whether you like that or not, it can't be done at the Senate level.
That is all we have for today. This conversation will keep going, but I have to turn the cameras off. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.